on the top of Yutes and Aleph, me shiny. When you're talking about Nisuin, which is a full-fledged Ishus, the Gemara argues with a compelling logic that whether the Nisuin came through her, meaning through Yud, or it came through her father because he gave her over for chuppah, in both cases, the Torah says she leaves the rishus of her father. It's the ishus of Nisuin that removes the rishus of the father, even though she's still a ketana. So therefore, even if she was niseis through Yud, Shalai Av, he didn't give her over to chuppah, but rather the Adon decided that he wants to marry her. Then if she became an almana or a grusha, he won't be able to sell her subsequently because she left, he meaning the father, because she left the rishus of the father. So, and yet, nevertheless, the Brisa argues, as we saw on Daf Yud Ches Amid Beis, that he could sell her in the case of Yud, if she was Nisarmala. So we see that Yud is only capable of generating Erison, and therefore the Yud does not remove and terminate the schus of the father to sell her, because this was an Erison Shalal Yidei Ha'am. Now again, according to the whole Gemara that we learned here at Daf Yud Ches Amid Beis assumed the interpretation of Rav Amram of the Brisa, that the Brisa allows the father to sell his daughter after she became an almana in the case of an almana min hayud. And that's based on Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, as we saw earlier on Daf Yud Ches Amid Beis, who holds that most mikneh, the original most, lavla Kiddushin nitna. So this is called Erison Shalal Yidei Av, and then that Erison is not mafkia his chus, his chus, the father's chus, to sell her as an omavriya. So the Gemara asks the following: that's okay, according to Rav Amram. But Ula Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak the Yomar, Afi Ula Rav Yossi, Rav Yehuda Mos Rishonos LeKiddushin Nitnu. When the Adon buys the omavriya, those mos are given for the purpose of Yud. If later on at the end he's miyayid her, the mispayel about Freya, that he was mekadesh her with these mos with which he purchased her as an omavriya, is then b'mayim mukim la. How could you interpret the brisa that says that there's mechir of an almana according to Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak? Once the Adon was miyayid her, and l'mafrei it's mispar that the father, when he sold her, he received the kesef mikneh for amos as kesef kiddushin. So therefore, it's l'maisa. At the end of the day, it's as if the father was mekadesh. And therefore, even if we'll interpret the brisa as referring to Kedusha Yud, now we're going to say that Yud creates Erison, but it's Erison that was created through the father, which we said, according to Rabbi Akiva, is mafkia, the schus of the father, the seller is an Oma. And the Gemara answers, Mukim la Rabbi Eliezer. Now, at this point, we're going to leave Rabbi Akiva behind, and we're going to pick up the shita of Rabbi Eliezer of bibigdo ba means bibagdo ba, and Rabbi Eliezer back on Daf Yud Ches Beis maintained the Omar l'shivchus achar shivchus hu de lo motzi mazbin le, that once he sells his daughter as an Amma, the father can no longer sell her a second time as an Amma. Aval l'shivchus achar ishus motzi mazbin le. But he can sell her as an Amma after Ishus, because that's not called Bibagdo Ba. Right? He wasn't bogated his daughter by giving her over for Ishus. So if she was this Armala, even for regular classic Kiddushin, Lav Dafke after Yehud, then according to Rabbi Eliezer, after every Kiddushin, he could still sell her as an Amma. Now, let's keep in mind that an Adon, in order to understand Reish Lakish, could be miyayid the Amma that he purchased, either to himself or to his son. That's all clear from the Psukim in Parshas Mishpatim. So Gemara now has the suffix. Boy, Rav Ashi, Ma'u shemiyayid Adam libno katan. Can an Adon be miyayid the Omevriya for his son if the son is a katan. Now, generally speaking, a katan cannot be mekadesh an isha. He's not a bardas, and his kinyan is not a valid halachic kinyan. But in the case of Yud, the Gemara, Reish Lakish has a suffix about this, because since the Torah gave the daughter over to her father when she's a ketana to create what ultimately would be Kiddushin Yud, and the kinyan is now chal through the father, maybe he could be miyayid lo even a katan. And the Gemara answers no. I mean, the Gemara explains the various sides in Reish Lakish's suffix. Bino amrachmana, Torah says im live no yadenu bino koldahu. It means any ben, whether he's a gadol or a katan. So that's one possibility. Oh, Dilma, another possibility. Maybe the kavana is bino dumya dideh, similar to the father himself. Mahu gadol, af bino gadol. So when the adon is miyayed, the omevriya to his son, it's got to be a son who's a gadol, because a katan is excluded by this principle called bino dumya dideh. And now the Gemara says, okay, I'm going to answer your question, Reish Lakish, with the following brayso. Omer Rabbi Zera Toshma, in the Parsha of Arayos, it says, Ish Asher Yinaf es Eishes Ish, Mos Yomas Hanoif Hanoafis. So the opening word here in the Chiyuv capital punishment Misas Bezdin in the case of Baal Ish is Ve'ish. And the brayso darshans Ish Prat L'Katan. That means if a katan has a relationship with an Eishes Ish, he's not chayav misa. Now the question is obvious. Why do I need a pasuk Ish with a drasha? What was the hava mean? That we could be mechayiv a katan misa? So there's an amazing chiddush here, the name of Tosfos, that since we will put this woman to death, assuming she was mazid and he was a bentes, then there's a havamina that even the boy should be put to death. And this would have the status of a behema nirvas. Right? We kill a behema nirvas. There was no guilt. There's no onshin. So we need a special pasuk to pater up the katan from Misas Bezdin. Asher yinaf es eishes ish pratle eishes katan. Eishes ish means there's ishes, but in the case of a woman who's married to a katan, and then she has an extramarital relationship, she's pater, and the bowl is pater too. So if Zera says, if a person could be miyayid his amma to a ben katan, in kain matzinu ishus lekatan. I'm not exactly sure how the Gemara makes a jump from Yehud to Ishus. In any event, the Gemara argues the following: Vela mai ena miyayid is telling me that we should derive the opposite from this brayso, that the adon cannot be miyayid to his ben katan is amai come and might lekra. Why do we need the pasuk? to be memayed an Eishes Katan from a Chiv Misa if you're going to tell me that he can't be miyayed, and there's no possibility of his having issues. So you want to be memayed an Eishes Katan from a Chiv Misa. How can you have an Eishes Katan at all if you're telling me that he cannot be miyayed his son who's a Katan? He says here, "Ein derech shetia ishus lekatan." The only possible way that you could have ishus to a katan if the father could be miyabed and his omavriya to his son who's a katan, because regular Kiddushin can't be chal with regard to la bardas. If tishot minod miyayed, so you see that a father could be miyayed his omavriya to his son who's a katan, and that's why there was a havamina that in the case of Eishes Katan, there would be a Chiv Misa. We need the pasuk Ish Prat LeKatan. Amar Rav Ashi Hacha. Here in this pasuk, here in this brisa that requires a pasuk to exclude Eishes Katan. B'Yavam v'Teishes Shana v'Yom Echad Abol Yivim Taskina under the brisa Chazil. Unbelievable! I'm so dispelled from this Gemara. How would you ever come up with a case of a katan who could create Ishus Doraisa? The answer is obvious in the case of Yiva. And as long as he's Ben Teshat, he's Royal Abiyah, then it becomes an Ishus Doraisa. Why? Because there already is a Zika, and that's based on the Ishus from the deceased brother, and you don't need Das to create this Kinyan. And since you don't need Das to create this Kinyan, all you need is a Maisa Bia, and that's how the Yibum is effectuated. Then even if he's a Katan, as long as he's a Bentes. See, I always was under the impression that for Yibum you have to wait till he's a Bar Mitzvah, but I see here, you wait till he's Bentes. In any event, is Ma'odid Tema, you might have thought, she's Ru'uya to him in the case of a Zikas Yibum. Ubiyaso, and the Bia of a Bentes is considered a Bia. And therefore, when he has a relationship with her, she becomes Ishto L'chol Dov, a full-fledged Ishus, and therefore, Bolem is Chai Beishus Ishkam Mashmalon. So we thought that there was an Ishus Dorais in the case of a Kot Bentes for Yibum. And the Chiddush is that even though there is Ishus, but Habola is not Chayav Misa. It's like a quasi Ishus, because you need that she be married to a Gadol and not to a Kotel. In any event, the bottom line is there's no proof from this brisa as far as the Suffolk Reish Lakish whether the Av could be miyayed his Amma to his son who's a Kotel. So now the Gemara asks the following question. Okay, you interpreted the brisa. We can survive that. My Havi Allah. So what's the final conclusion of this suffix? Can the yud of an Amma be effectuated towards a ben hakatan? Toshma the Omer of Aibo. Omer of Yanai. Ein yud el begadol. Ein yud el midas. Right? The Adon cannot be miyayed unless he's a gadol. And he cannot be miyayed her unless he has das. And this is the exclusion of a ben katan, because a ben katan cannot be subject to yud, and the Adon could not be miyayed the Amma to a ben katan. Why? Because you need a gadol, you need a bardas. In fact, the Gemara Tarti, why did you have to tell me both of these things that you need das? Why don't you just tell me ein yud el begadol? Or the opposite. Maybe you could have just told me that ein iyud el midas, and therefore I would understand that you need a gadol because the cotton is a lav das. And the Gemara answers that which Rav Yanai said ein iyud el midas, that's not an additional din, but rather Matam Komer, he wants to explain the nature or the meaning behind the din that Matam ein iyud el begadol, lefisha ein iyud el midas. And a katan doesn't have das. Now, I'm a little bit confused about the following. Why is it so pashut that the katan has to have das? L'chora, the das is supplied by the adon, by the father of this katan. But that's how the Gemara is interpreting this statement of Rav Aibo when he says, Ein Yud Ela Begadol. And he's already explained that Ein Yud El Midas, and that should certainly exclude a katan. But he's only coming to explain why is there no Yud unless you have a gadol, and the answer is because Ein Yud El Midas. So it's really interesting. The decision to go ahead with Yud is that of the father, the Adon. But the das to create the ishus has to come from the ben. Ibai saying another answer. My midas. What does Rabbi Yanai mean when he says midas? He doesn't mean midas hamiyayed, the person who's actually implementing the das, implementing the yud. But rather he means midas the da. You need the das of the amma. Now, this is really a pella, das of the Amma. The Amma is a katana. The Tani Abai Berei the Rabbi Abba Avo Asher Lo Ya'ada. The pasuk says in Parshas Mishpatim, Asher Lo Ya'ada. What is Ya'ada? Mi Malamich Yitzarch Liyada. Now, Liyada. I'm not sure if it's liyada or liyada. In any event, so the Torah is saying that you have to notify the girl that she's being married. Who? And we're referring now to Abaye, who's the son of Rabbi Avo, Tani Levu Omerle. He not only passed on the tradition of this brisa, but he also interpreted the brisa. That you have to notify the Amma that he's been miyayda for an Isha. It's not enough to just take the kesef kinyan of the father as he received it when he sold his daughter as an Amma. The Kiddushin Yud. So again, we're going now with the shita that Mos Rishonos Lavle Kiddushin Nitnu, and therefore he's Makadish her through being mochel on the shibud moment of those years of Amhus that are left. The Aliba the Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yudi Omer Shabbos Rishonos Lavle Kiddushin Nitnu. So when he's miyayid her, he's not kona her with the original Kiddushin L'Mafreya, but now he's Makadish her with a shibud, sheyesh lo aleh, that he owns the shibud on her for the avoda, for the malacha, and therefore you have to notify her that she will agree to this Kiddushin, because without it, there's no Kiddushin. Because again, if you didn't hold like Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, and the original Mos were given l'shem Kiddushin, we would not need to notify her because all we need is the das ha'av. But if we hold that we need a new Kiddushin of Yud now, not with the original Mos that were given for Yud to the father, is therefore we need the das ha'isha. So when Rav Yanai says, Ein Yidel Bidas, he had in mind this din based on the sheet of Rav Yossi, Rav Yehuda, and therefore you have to say Ein Yud El Begadol. So again, this sugya needs more study in terms of the das of the isha when she's only a ketana. I'm not sure if there's anything here in the commentaries about it right now. I don't see it right now. But in any event, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Omer Afilu Temel Kiddushin Nitnu. Even if you'll tell me that the original mos that were given at the time when the Adon purchased the Omer from the fathers, the Kiddushin Nitnu. So sorry. Shalom. Shiny Hacha. The Amrachmana Ye'ada. So again, even if we're holding that the original Kiddushin was given for Yud, that Kesef, nevertheless, we can demand and require that he notify her. Why? Because the Torah says Ye'ada. Ye'ada is mashma Yidi'ah. He has to notify her. Even though, again, it's the father who was Makabel the Kiddushin from the get-go when he sold her as an Amma for Kesef Kiddushin. So the Gemara now wants to clarify the source for the Shita of Rav Yossi that most Rishonos lav the Kiddushin, Yomai, Rav Yossi, Rav Yehuda, who says that that most Rishonos lav the Kiddushin ninhu, according to Abaye. The Sanya we learned in the Brisa, it says Asher lo ye'ada v'efda tzarich shehei shehus bayom kidei pedia. So from the fact that the pasuk mentions pigeon right near Yud ye'ada v'hefda, we darshan that is miyada tzarich shehei shehus bayom. There has to be a time period during the day when she's still in his Amma. Kidei P'tia, the shear of P'tia.
Coming in 15 minutes.
Okay, I'm almost finished.
We have to clear space here, maybe.
What'd you say about rang?
It's a nice that the phone rang.
Yeah. We have Bezik coming. So if you don't answer the phone, Bezik doesn't come. Anyway, so he cannot be niyayed her at a time when there's no shear of pediyah. Mikan Omer Rav Yossi Rav Yehuda im yesh shehus bayom kidei lasosi ma shavapruta. If there's still enough time in the day that he could do with her a malacha that's worth a pruta. So therefore, if they wanted to be podaha, they would have to pay her. I'm sorry, pay him, I should say, for, at least the shavapruta, and tachas the shavapruta could be mochel and create kiddushin yev v'im lav. If there's not enough time for shavapruta, einu mekudeshes alma kasavar mos rishonos lav lekiddushin, and the Gemara rejects this. Rav Nachman Yitzchak Omer Afilu Temel Kiddushin Nitnu, even if you'll say that according to Rav Yossi Rav Yehuda, the original mos were given for Kiddushin Shani Hacha. Nevertheless, why do we need a chov of an avod of shavapruta? Because Yid is different from any other Kiddushin, the Amar Rachmana Vefda, and it says Ye'ada Vefda, that she shire to make pigeon b'shashem yad. So again, even though the Kiddushin was done at the original time Mechira, but nevertheless we still need to make pigeon at the moment of Yud. So this he calls here in the name of the Ramban, Gzeras HaKosuv, Sheishar Etzla Shibud Shel Pruta. Otherwise, it's as if she already went free, and therefore there's no possibility of you. Omar Rav Nachman, Omer Adam Lebito Ketana Tzeiva Kabli Kiddushaya. A father could say to his daughters, a Ketana, go out and be Makabli your Kiddushin, even though she doesn't have Das. And let's derive that from the Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda. Lav Hamar Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, most Rishonis Lav Kiddushin Nitna. V'chim Eshayer Pruta, Shav Pruta, Havi Kiddushin. So Kiddushin is going to be Chal now when he is Mochel on the Shav Pruta. And yet the Kiddushin is with a Ketana. But since the father knew when he sold her that the Adon could be miyayid her, it's as if he said to her, Tzei v'kabli Kiddushaya, and the Kiddushin is now valid. Why? Because she agreed to this Kiddushin. And even though she's a Ketana, the Kiddushin can be Chalachinami, here too, when a father says to his daughter, Tzei v'kabli Kiddushaya, Lo Shna, she could be Makabel, the Kesef Kiddushin, and the Kiddushin is Chal. Mamish Apellah. The Omar Rav Nachman, a Makadish b'milva sheyesh lo mashkon mekudeshes mida Rav Yossi Rav Yehuda. If a person is mochel a halva that he gave to a woman, and he has a mashkon that she gave to him when she took the halva, then she's mekudeshes, and we can derive this from a Rav Yossi Rav Yehuda. Lav Rav Yossi Rav Yehuda. Most are Rishonos lav lekedushin ninu. The original most were not given for Kiddushin. So the Yid is now with the Kesef that's remaining, the balance from Hamachira. And he says, Umutal Oleho Leporo Oshavyo is therefore high. Alvoi, right? That which is left in the framework of her Amhus as an obligation to give him that malacha, that's called a chov. That's called halva. The he gufa, and she herself is kemashkon. It's like she's a mashkon on the chov. And yet, and here we turn to Daf Yutes of Beis v'chim eshayer ba, when there's a little bit more time left over that she has to do work for him, then he's kona b'shava pruta umiyayid, and he's miyayid her for an isha and have a kiddushin, and the kiddushin is chal. It's hachinami here to loshna. So you see clearly from Rabbi Yossi that you can be mekadosh milva sheyesh alav mashkon, and he can be mochel hadachov, and the kiddushin will be chal. Okay, so we're up to Tanur Rabbanon on the top of Yutes Amid Beis, and this Amir Hashem will finish later on. Okay, then. So I wish you a great Shabbos and Yashka. Thank you so much.